Hello again! Today we'll be analysing the Atlas arc and demonstrating how RWBY used this arc to further their deconstruction and reconstruction of heroism. Not just in the burdens of being a hero, but what it means to be in reality, by choice or assigned so by others, the protagonist of a story. We have seen these elements before, such as how being placed on a pedestal and isolated by status of being Ozpin's chosen one caused Pyrrha to begin fraying, or how the Lost Fable showed us the fear and paranoia that being Remnant's, finger quotes, main character left Ozpin with. Similarly, Volume 9 showed us the impacts of being a role before a person through both Summer and RWBY, which was a major milestone to the series and Ruby Rose as a character. But these arcs are not all identical, otherwise that would be boring, and the Atlas arc tackles these themes in their own unique way and with a unique slate of characters and circumstances to provide a distinct story told from unique angles. Specifically, the Atlas arc comes at these themes through the lens of dehumanization and sacrifice, when it's done to someone, what it does to them, and even when it's self-inflicted. The three main focus characters for this are James, Ironwood, Penny Polendina as two sides of the same coin, with an aside to Cinder, who is, to torture a metaphor, coin-shaped, with the likes of Mandel, the Aesops, and others serving as the gradient between them. The dehumanization aspect is subtext. In terms of overt text, well, the characters say it best.
And I wanted my military here, protecting my people.
But it's not protecting them. It's making everyone hate you.
It's a price I'm willing to pay.
You're not the one having to struggle.
We have all had to make sacrifices for the greater good. Mantle has had to bear a lot of the burden, yes, but...
They're bearing all of it! The longer this waiting game goes on, the harder each day gets for people down there, and now you want to send in more soldiers? You can't force people to fall in line. If you do that, you'll just be trading all of these problems for the Grim.
I will sacrifice whatever it takes to stop her.
Oh, I hope you do, James. I hope you do.
What are you doing? My life doesn't matter.
I disagree. Or let me take the relic to Salem, and maybe she will call off her attack on the kingdom.
I have sacrificed everything!
No! You have sacrificed everyone else. You closed the borders. You squeezed Mantle until it broke.
Thus we reach the heart of the story, its characters. So let's discuss how the cast are utilized to explore dehumanization, as well as the concept of heroism through sacrifice, and through that main character syndrome. But first, a thank you to my wonderful patrons for making these episodes possible. Links below. Now, RWBY utilizes the themes of dehumanization a lot in the Atlas arc. The Faunus and the Crater are dehumanized by the humans of Mantle and Atlas as being animalistic and subhuman and don't even register to those in power. The people of Mantle are dehumanized and regarded as but a few city blocks whose invasion doesn't even disrupt Elysian picnics. Their suffering is a philosophical moral burden and political nuisance for Ironwood. Everything to do with their suffering and losses came back to be about Ironwood rather than them, even though they were the ones being sacrificed. Freya is robbed of all agency and respect so she can be isolated to keep control of her powers in direct violation of how they are meant to work. Then she almost has her soul ripped out while unconscious. The Aesops are cogs in a machine, expected to view themselves as interchangeable, and are all convinced they don't matter except in how they serve Atlas. Winter regards expressing herself as borderline disloyalty, and her status as a soldier means no time for healing. She's poured into a prosthetic and hurled back into the literal belly of the beast without a care. We especially see it in how Penny is not treated like a person, but at Elysian military property, who is functionally always on the clock under Ironwood's control and has no real freedom. We see it in how Cinder is collared, tortured, and kept as a slave, with even the only person willing to help her viewing the rights of the slave holders as more important than Cinder's safety. And we see it in how Ironwood perceives his own humanity as a weakness and Salem's perceived inhumanity as a strength, and how these feed into his dehumanization of others and himself, thus all accumulating in an ideology of you don't matter, I don't matter, no one matters, what matters is what we accomplish. A stance directly challenged in universe by Oscar, who is consistently acting as Ironwood's consciousness despite also being dehumanized by having his identity constantly ignored in favor of Ozpin's by the man he's trying to help. Some characters have managed to escape or were trying to escape their dehumanization spiral. The Happy Huntresses serve as the best example, effective and pragmatic with a good degree of discipline, but also collaborative, open, and with a focus on idealistic goals. These character beats are coupled with RWBY's work to deconstruct the role of hero and protagonist, which are part of the series' overall meta-narrative. In this case, the Atlas arc centered on themes relating to heroism through sacrifice. The two characters who were most central and used to communicate RWBY's conclusion were Ironwood and Penny, so let's list off the 3 points of comparison thematically, shall we? Dehumanization. Ironwood explicitly admires what he perceives as Salem's inhumanity, seeing it as a strength.
It's what makes us different from her.
Sometimes I worry that's her greatest advantage. Without humanity, does she still feel fear? Does she ever hesitate? When Salem hit Beacon, even with all my ships, all of my soldiers, I was no match for her. I've never felt so helpless. The way she told me she was there.
As his headspace declines, he seeks to become more like her in a bid to succeed. That is to say, his increasing immorality is tied to the fact he believes that is what makes Salem such an effective foe. He conflates ruthlessness and cruelty with a path to success. If he's not winning by being a monster like Salem, clearly he's not doing it hard enough. It is a tool to be applied not just to others but to himself. This can even be seen, and I believe was directly commented on by the writers, in how Ironwood is subconsciously ableist or has some preconceived issues with prosthetics. This is because he's the only prosthetic using character uncomfortable with prosthetics. Yang, Maria, Pietro, Tyrion, Mercury are all very comfortable with their own, but Ironwood hides his whenever he can, and he blames them for problems like waking up at night. In this regard, his decision to flay and then replace his arm is an in-universe act of self-dehumanization, because if the writers thought prosthetics eat your soul, Yang wouldn't be so fond of hers. Now for the opposite side of the coin. Penny is dehumanized, or I guess one could say depersonified. Her insecurities with her robot nature are largely, if not entirely, rooted in how other people treat her because of it, rather than an inborn self-hatred seen in other robotic characters.
Who wants the machine to show them an alternate reality?
Oh, I want to know what would happen if I were human. I mean, being a robot's great, but we don't have emotions, and sometimes that makes me very sad.
Oh, Lordy Lou, there he goes again. Well, let's give baby what he wants.
She is shown to relish her nature and be confident with it around others who accept her, while only growing uncomfortable when people talk about her like a tool or use her like one. And the speed with which co-workers, allies and enemies shift their perspective on her from person to puppet so long as it suits their needs is a sign that depersonification has been an undercurrent her entire life. Penny is also demonstrably more successful against Cinder as a robot than when seemingly made human, and her nature is never presented as a problem into itself. So we have someone who dehumanizes others and himself, and someone who is dehumanized by those around her, but the comparison and contrast don't end there, because the next layer to it ties into how they are crushed under the sheer weight of being the hero of the story, or in other words, the protagonist in their own minds. It's fitting that the Atlas arc would give us so many characters with Atlas syndrome. A quick but topical aside on Atlas and main character syndrome. This belief is also why many within Atlas came to see the country itself as a stand-in for the world. It's rather similar to how a lot of US Americans and their media portray their nation as such, and Atlas is a deliberate commentary on the USA. See, in their minds, Atlas was the main character country, and the rest of the nations needed their protection and guidance. This is despite their inability to even secure Mantle, and is further undercut by Ironwood pulling Atlesian forces out of Mistral once he suspected an attack. This is why it was so easy for Ironwood to abandon Remnant. He equated Atlas with the world more than the actual world, and had already shown he prioritized it over others, i.e. Mantle. Now, back to the characters. Going back as far as Volume 2, both Ironwood and Penny either try to place themselves in charge of defending or saving the world, or have been told it is their responsibility to do so. This attitude grows worse with the fall of Beacon. Ironwood centralizes responsibility and by extension power onto his own shoulders. He must have the plan, he must lead the way, he must be the one to protect the world. It is made clear this is exhausting him from the moment Ruby and Co arrive, and it plays a key role in his increasingly protagonist-centered morality. In contrast, Penny's stance is subtler, but her duties as protector of Mantle and her casual disregard for her own safety or injury are a recurring element across Volume 7, but they become especially prominent in Volume 8 as she tries to fall on her sword at the first opportunity and every ensuing opportunity. This shows how both of them have internalized the idea that everything bad coming their way or that happens is in some way their problem to fix, their fault, or that they alone must be the one to handle it. The increasing impossibility of his chances causes Ironwood to seek more control as he spirals into paranoid terror, while Penny begins self-destructing out of a misplaced sense of guilt and responsibility.
Kill me.
And this leads us directly to sacrifice. Because both Ironwood and Penny will do whatever it takes to be the hero the world needs before they are a person, and that means sacrificing everything, doesn't it? Well, first let's highlight their contrasting interpretations of the ideals of sacrifice and heroism. Ironwood sacrifices everyone else for his goals and beliefs, for this idea of what Atlas is and what it is meant to be and what it is worth. That's also not a new trait, it's one that just got worse over time. Sacrificing Ozpin's career and reputation so he could control the Vital Festival in Volume 2, sacrificing allies and internal stability for a sense of security in Volume 4, and sacrificing Mistral because he feared another attack in Volume 5, which all set up his willing sacrifice of Mantle and eventually the world for his idea of Atlas, which has become interwoven with his own sense of self. Meanwhile, Penny tries to sacrifice herself and her belief that she must save the world and its people. Again, this is not new. Penny is ride or die for her loved ones so fast, which is established in Volume 1 and is consistently emphasized by her words and drive to connect with RWBY, while Volume 2 set up the idea that she's been told since her inception that she was going to be responsible for saving the world. This then got worse after her resurrection Atlas that had her constantly working and essentially in charge of protecting an increasingly indefensible city, and with how casual she is about danger in contrast to her loved ones. By Volume 8, Penny had to keep being talked out of throwing her life away in the vain hope that Ironwood and Salem would calm down and show mercy. The big difference between Ironwood and Penny in this regard is that Penny will at least listen when people try to talk her out of things. By Volume 8, Ironwood had very much stopped even feigning listening. Penny defined her self-worth and existence by helping others, hence becoming so despondent and struggling to prioritize the overall strategies at play, instead choosing to throw herself into battle after battle, danger after danger, so long as it meant she was taking action, even if it was detrimental to herself and by extension even the cause. In contrast, Ironwood cannot conceive of himself as being expendable, because he has tethered himself to Atlas, which he is tethered to the world. He must do what is necessary, his plans must work. He is, after all, the main character, and everything else is just childish distractions. He has to be right. Penny, by contrast, regards herself as the expendable one and takes on guilt for most, if not all, the bad things around her, despite everyone's efforts to convince her otherwise. Different thought processes, but they both lead to characters on a self-destructive path, which is why they share the same tragic fate. Because while Penny's interpretation of sacrifice is more noble to see and experience than Ironwood's, it is still part of an incredibly self-destructive ideology, namely Atlas's, a place that places no value on people, only their use. Penny and Ironwood both fail because they both keep trying to sacrifice others, in the case of Ironwood, or themselves, in the case of Penny, to fulfill their designated role of hero, a role that on Remnant is no different than being a martyr.
You got Spirit Red, but this is the real world! The real world is cold! The real world doesn't care about spirit! You want to be a hero? Then play the part and die like every other huntsman in history! Ow! As for me, I'll do what I do best. Lie, steal, cheat, and survive!
But before we cap things off, let's circle back to the broken mirror, the coin-shaped cinder, because like Penny, she was shaped by the brutal dehumanization of her person in Atlas as a slave. Unlike Penny, where her existence as being with rights and personhood was at least tentatively played with but cast out the moment it was inconvenient, Cinder never had the illusion she was anything at all. Without you, I'm nothing.
Without you, I am nothing. Without you, I am nothing. Without you, I am nothing. But because of you, I am everything.
She was purchased as a product, treated as a whipping girl, and used as a slave. The Glass Unicorn, an openly bigoted establishment, was comfortable enough with this to barely obfuscate it, which should tell you a lot about Atlas's laws, lack thereof, and how corrupt their police and social services are, assuming they even have the latter, which they may not. Quick note to viewers, never assume a show set in another world has all the same stuff we do. Remnant, like Star Wars, probably lacks a Geneva Convention. The only Elysian willing to help her was Rhodes, and he still prioritized the law, which kept Cinder bound to Madame as a higher priority than Cinder's safety or personhood. Like with Penny, this disregard for Cinder's person was more subtle, and some have tried to read it as Rhodes merely being concerned about the consequences Cinder could face for trying to escape Madame. But realistically, Cinder had a goddamn shock collar around her neck and was maybe hours away from being pushed to murder out of desperation when the two of them met. He had time to train her for hours, and he even armed her. It's hard to envision what excuse he had to not just remove her and run off to Vacuo or somewhere. Best case scenario, he was more lawful than good. Worst case scenario, he didn't want to risk his otherwise comfortable position, but still wanted to assuage his guilt. In the end, it didn't matter. Cinder was uncovered and ambushed by her slave owners and backed into a corner, and what came next was entirely predictable. What stands out to me is Cinder's dialogue. Because of you, I am everything. Even if we ignore how Cinder's internalized image of power is reflected in standing over a helpless figure, lecturing them as Madame did to her, though it is very obvious, we see here how Cinder internally mythologizes her own suffering to give purpose and meaning to it. Cinder was dehumanized and internalized the suffering into essentially a sacrifice that made her powerful, that imbued her with purpose and with a destiny. This feeds into having a similar case of main character syndrome to Ironwood and Penny. Of course, Cinder's internal mythos wasn't shaped by Ozpin's heroic narrative of lone heroes and lone guardians bearing the burdens of the world, or more, they were shaped by those ideals of failure, something Cinder hinted at in Volume 3 with her mocking and scathing tone when it came to hunters and conducting themselves with.
Our academy's headmasters wield more power than most armies, and one was audacious enough to control both. They cling to this power in the name of peace, and yet, what do we have here? One nation's attempt at a synthetic army, mercilessly torn apart by another star pupil. What need would Atlas have for a soldier disguised as an innocent little girl? I don't think the Grimm can tell the difference. And what, I ask you, is Ozpin teaching his students? First a dismemberment, now this? Huntsmen and huntresses should carry themselves with honor and mercy. Yet I have witnessed neither.
With all that, it's not hard to see why Cinder regards, consciously or subconsciously, everyone around her as a potential sacrifice for her story/destiny. It's doubtful Cinder can entirely conceive of any other path than subjugated suffering or victory and power, and she refuses to suffer the former again. Any sacrifice, even recreating her dynamic with Madame, is worth it if it means she can accomplish her goal. In this regard, she escaped the system but was still so shaped by it she's simply become a different kind of self-destructive and destructive force. She has the destructive tendencies of two major characters, not just one. Externally and internally immolating relationships, alliances, compromising her own freedom in a bid to reach her goal. She was dehumanized, and so she now dehumanizes everyone else. In many ways, she embodies so much of Atlas that it's fitting she played a pivotal role in the arc. Given all this, it is rather fitting she was the one who delivered the final word to Ironwood and was the vehicle for Penny's self-sacrificial tendencies to win out. Because yes, let's talk about Penny's fall for a moment, regardless of any theories of resurrection or not. I really think this needs to be addressed. They made her human? One of the most common complaints or critiques I see regarding Penny's story in Atlas is the idea of her having been made human. There are several reasons that people might take issue with this that I will cover going forward, but first, do we even know she was human? When scanned, Penny seemed to be made up of magical energy, and given old world magical as for shapeshifting, it's possible she simply went from a mechanical synthetic to a magical synthetic. We did also see her injured, but I still think it's questionable if she was human. Still, the trope is that humanity, or more accurately personhood via humanity, is a reward and that they only count as a person now that they've earned it. Such an interpretation of Penny's character does not hold up to scrutiny. Penny's inherent nature as a real girl has been emphasized since the moment the topic was first broached. The only people who question it are villains, and she was affirmed by gender-based magics in Volume 7. Quite literally, the only reason they even changed her body is because Penny was otherwise going to die from the equivalent of a disease. This was essentially an experimental surgery that they only did out of grudging necessity. Now, Penny appreciated not being dead and enjoyed the increased tactile sensation, but we also see how fragile and floundering she is in her new form. When Penny fought Cinder last time with Cinder having backup, Penny kicked her ass, but the second time around it is Penny who has the support, and yet she's barely able to keep up. She's in pain, she can't fly easily, she can't use her weapons, she's lost a ton of functions that were once innate to her very being. Simply put, I don't think the new body was presented as a good thing overall. It was a desperate gamble to preserve her life, nothing more. For comparison's sake, if RWBY was dying and had her soul moved into a magical marionette and was super jazzed about how she could do cool combo attacks thanks to her joints being so spinny, only to fall in battle because her new form is more fragile, then I don't think we'd be calling it a reward. Thus, I think it's important for fans to ask themselves if RWBY actually used that trope, subverted it, or didn't even approach it and people just read into it due to presumption. Now, was this wasteful? Given where I stand, I'd argue no, but as to why people feel that way, well, if we discount them just liking Penny a whole lot, I think the critical argument for it would be along these lines. Why dedicate time to saving her if she's going to fall anyway? And had Penny gotten through Volume 8 only to casually get taken out off screen or by some other problem in Volume 9, I'd agree that it was a bad decision to undercut the previous climax and arc. The thing is though, that is not what happened here. Penny was rescued before the story arc was even done, before the actual climax of the story. There's a reason people went into this anticipating something going wrong. Everyone knew that Cinder had yet to make her play. This was not an accident, but this was a tragedy in the narrative and thematic sense. For comparison's sake, compare it to Pyrrha agreeing to take on Amber's power only for it not to matter because Cinder tracked down their location. If one liked Penny a huge deal, then I understand being upset by it, and broadly speaking, a surviving character can do more in a story than a deceased one, but that is not always workable if one wishes to retain their thematic coherence or an overarching narrative. To keep Penny, RWBY would need to overhaul the entire Atlas arc and undermine their own series' ongoing themes regarding the nature of heroism, martyrdom, and sacrifice versus self-harm, making a giant mess of the story just to keep a fan favourite. Finally, and this is the big one, real-world resonance. It has long been common, though not universal, in fandom for people to perceive Penny as a form of disabled representation, with many fans choosing to present her with prosthetic limbs in real-world AUs. And there is a history of media not being willing to overtly portray many minorities on screen, or in a sympathetic light, while using non-human characters as stand-ins, or them being adopted as such by certain communities. However, while this is understandable and sympathetic and something I do myself, I do not think there is a basis to call Penny's transformation or fall ableism as somehow. The biggest reason being that there is no evidence as far as I am aware that the writers intended Penny to be analogous to a disabled person or thematically to represent disabled people. And the popularity of this in fandom works is irrelevant because the writers would be in a legally complicated position if they let fan works influence their writing. This is why you generally avoid sending fan art to creators, and it being a common trend in fandom doesn't mean they were necessarily aware of it. Thus, while it's a fine and fun interpretation, I don't think one can argue it was an act of deliberate offence on the creator's part, especially if they never even conceived of Penny as such, nor shifted her presentation or theming or otherwise advertising her as such within the story, and as far as I can tell, their thematic framing of Penny never shifted and she was never used as to draw such comparisons. Thus, evidence for it hinges only on fan interpretations, which are fine and good and well reasoned. For comparison's sake, I take her as autistic coded because we share a lot of traits in that regard, but that doesn't mean it was canon or that one should take it as a sign of disdain or disregard on the author's part. One needs to be able to separate themselves from the story they are engaging with at least a little to maintain the barrier between themselves and the characters. Who they are is not who you are and vice versa. In essence, I think a lot of the stigma comes from people associating tropes and themes to the writer's decisions that were not actually in the story and just assuming them present based on other works of fiction as opposed to having any textual support within the RWBY narrative, or RWBY's efforts to deconstruct themes and tropes in general. Now, to round things off, both in regards to Penny and the video essay. Given everything I outlined regarding Penny, Ironwood, Cinder, and the themes of Atlas, I feel it should go without saying why I think her fall works for the story. If Penny just won or somehow survived without changing her ideological thinking regarding self-sacrifice and heroism, then this would undermine the entire narrative and themes of the story. It would either just be ignoring them solely for the purpose of keeping a fan favourite around, or would be implicitly arguing that her self-sacrificial tendencies to be idolised rather than seen as self-destructive. Penny surviving would necessitate her making the decision to prioritise the mission over her self-sacrificing tendencies, or to otherwise prioritise her own safety, which she has every right to do given the circumstances, but obviously would not do because of said self-sacrificing tendencies, which has been a recurring trait across the volume. Penny needed to be talked down again and again from self-sacrifice, but the heart of the matter was never broached. The ideal was never challenged because they didn't have the time, and the main person doing the convincing had an equally unhealthy mindset regarding heroism. Thus, her survival would not involve Penny flinging herself into another battle where she barely survived the last few attempts only to win this time, or just barely being saved again as she had so many times already. I am saying to keep Penny alive but keep everything else the same, one throws away the thematic and narrative meaning of the entire Atlas arc. People are obviously free not to be fans of it. I too am sad when characters I like die, but that doesn't make it bad writing, and I hope I have shown why I think this tragedy worked. This is the series' darkest moment, all of which meshes neatly into the meta-narrative and overarching story and themes RWBY have been communicating from the start. It is tragic, but that's the point. RWBY, while respecting valiant sacrifice, do not want it to be idolized. Pyrrha and Penny both sacrificed themselves, and there was genuine love, heroism, and nobility in these acts, which can give a sense of comfort. But ultimately, RWBY say it would have been better had they not chosen to stand alone at all. Better if they had not been forced or convinced they had to carry the burdens in isolation, and had not done so, they might have been here today, and Remnant would be better for it. And that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to help support my work, please swing by my Patreon. If you'd like to commission 3D models, please hit up my Ko-fi. Thanks for tuning in.